Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Chad Manion. I shall be taking you through today's event. It's pretty good to be back to speak in front of Leeds TS, which I've had a long, close affiliation with. I've always found Leeds to be one of the most open-minded, free-thinking, critically aware group within the entire theosophical world. I've traveled far and wide. I think many of you probably are no strangers to my talks before. Um, I have been to the Leeds branch a few times. I've always enjoyed the debates and discussions we've had there. I've also been all across the TS, the country. But now the times that we're living in, we require more than what we've essentially, been presented with, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So today, this down. So it's the lost history and prophecy. It's about the theosophy of geometry and rhythm of time, which I'm sharing with you today. So those of you who've never heard me speak before, I'm Professor Dr. Chad Manion, and a little bit about myself, who I am. Used to work in the financial markets before. I was one of the first market strategists to predict the collapse. Ever since then, I've worked in both the corporate setting and in academia. I've recently got awarded my distinguished adjunct professorship for my work in the research field that I was involved with. I've also had a long academic career. I've been an activist, a human rights activist as well, for a number of years, and currently still an academic, but I've also worked in the corporate world as a trainer. But more importantly, above all else, I think it's important to say I am a theosopher at heart. So, what is my talk today all about? It's about the last decade and even earlier than that. My interdisciplinary research work involves both the left-brained science, mathematics, astronomy, because I started my life as an astronomer working in astrophysics and cosmology. But then I looked at, when I was in the financial markets, I did something called logical operations and tactical problem solving, worked as a research analyst in behavioral finance, where I was acquainted with trends, patterns in human behavior. But I had a very spiritual side to my life, having been raised in Africa, having grown up around shamans and tribal elders, and so I also had a deep sense within me of the shamanic aspect, which led me to put those two together. And when I presented my first talk in the TS in the Blavatsky Lodge here in London, I talked about some of these ideas which I felt people were really interested in knowing more about. So it led me to look briefly back at the history. So I start off with the beginning of the planet, 4.5 billion years to 2012 at the bottom, which is the end of the Mayan calendar. And I looked at the pattern in nature and the cycles of time, where everything happens within a certain set pattern. From the Earth's formation to the arrival of the first sponge fish, starfish, 400 million years, the origin of life on this planet and the emergence of human civilization. There's always a pattern and a cycle to this. So if you look at this little visualization of this spiral, this gives you an understanding of how things work. So going back to the brief history to where we are, the cycles of time, it led me to look into the very nature of time itself and how time is structured and organized. So this is what began for me. Now, what is theosophy and where does it fit in? Theosophy comes from the word theos and sophis, which is the wisdom of gods or divine understanding. Now, what are the teachings of time that have been left behind for us? So if we look at the teachings on time itself, there is a lot of ancient knowledge that's been passed down by those who are seeking. the seekers, as I call them. These are what you may regard as the masters or the sages and elders that offer insights and guidance of how they forecast possibilities. How do they view time? How do they see the outcome of events or the decisions made by individuals? So these are the teachings, and I've had a chance to look at these, in preparation for today. Right now, what I'm sure is on everyone's mind is we're currently living in very interesting times. Some consider this the darkest age in human history. Some see it as a coming of an age of light in front of us. Well, where is it leading us to? And what does the future hold? So this is probably, why we're all here in the first place. So if we look at the wisdom traditions that we have in the TS, what are the conventional ideas? It goes back to, the Mayans, who were probably the most accurate in forecasting events that have come true. Nostradamus is another. We also have Blavatsky herself in some of her doctrines when she mentioned about the emergence of the different root races and which cycle of history will be dominated by which group of people. Alice Bailey is also known for this. She shared a lot of information about this. And we also have people like Ledbetter, so those who had the gift of channeling, people like St. John, who, in his vision of what comes. But we also have the ancient written Puranic tradition in the old Indian texts. So we have all of these ideas which have contributed to the heritage of knowledge that we have. So we're going to look at disaggregating the crux of these. Now, if we look at time itself from a scientific perspective, we have the field of quantum physics, which is basically the science of possibilities, and it believes everything is possible at a given point in time. We also have something in science called the law of temporal mechanics, which is the mechanism of time and how space-time itself operates. I will hope to simplify these. Right now, we have a very poor understanding of the laws of space-time, specifically because we live in a 4D world. The fourth density is supposed to be space-time. Nobody really understands multidimensionality. If you ask a mathematician, he will tell you the dimensions are merely more distortions of infinite, absolute concepts. So it goes from very abstract to the very concrete, where they tell you you can add more dimensions. So you've got length, breadth, height, depth. Then you have its position, in time, and it can change. So there are all these, we have ideas which we are not capable as a human being of understanding. And so we've got psychoneural physics, which is also about how does time work within the human brain, which allows people who have remote viewing abilities using assisted technology to view in different possibilities. And that's where we get guys like the Robert Monroe Institute. When the CIA started to do experiments in viewing time and how they see different possibilities so they can have control over the reality. This has been tried and tested by many right through human civilization, but it seems nobody has got this right. So we also have non-human research contribution. Let me clarify what I mean by non-human. So any knowledge that has been handed down to us from the generations is information that's passed down by people, essentially. It's generational knowledge that's been handed down by human beings and their understanding. But you've got knowledge that's been directly given to the human, race by something else that is not really classified as human. So how does that work? So you have people that say they go into a trance or a seance, and they're communicating with an intelligence that's beyond human comprehension. So from that standpoint, that's where I am when I say it's beyond the human boundary of comprehension, which means to some extent, ancient prophecies are a combination of that which is guided by human beings and that which has been handed down by something else to the human aspirant. So we have to be aware of, that's just the background of where this idea that I'm sharing with you comes from. So I'm going to go a little bit now about the nature of space-time and dimensionality. Firstly, it's not what people think it is. There is something we call a quantum connection, where anybody who has the ability, those who are adepts, they've mastered their own mind, they have access to these subtle realms where if you look at consciousness as being spread out universally, every single molecule holds a possibility in the universe because it's infinite. So anyone who has the ability to perceive the unseen and hidden realms has access to infinite knowledge, essentially. That's the basic idea, foundational basis of most theosophy. And we believe in the theosophical tradition that the unseen and unknown world holds great, immense possibility and influence over what is seen. That's true even from a scientific perspective, because there was a great alchemist, Ramon Lu, who was one of the great minds within the Christian world during the time of the Crusades. He was one of the great masters who said that the unseen world affects what is seen. So things like the past, present, and future potential and multiple probabilities are all interconnected. And time itself is a construct that we don't understand, but we can only experience. That which you cannot understand, you can only learn about by experientially living that reality. So I've got a little visualization to help you understand. So anybody who has the ability to perceive, they look at, you've got somebody who's an observer, over here. So you've got an observer looking into or peering into something, and you have light from the past, and you've got light or the future. You've got two possibilities. You can either go backwards, in this case bottom, or upwards, which is forwards for an observer, and you are square in the middle. And this is one way of understanding the hypersurface of the present, because the present is a hypersurface on which the past and the future meet. So again, for the more scientifically minded, this is just a simple way of stating that we are always, in every moment of our life, right in the meeting point where the future and the past come together. So the past is very finite because it's completely experienced and it's in the past, so you know exactly what you've lived. But you don't know what the future holds. So in any moment in your life, you must realize that the future has far more, infinitely more power than the past. Because you know your past, you can't change it, it's there. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. What you can do is to be present, because the future is unknown. It has infinite potential because you don't know what it holds. So that's where the magic happens. So like what Einstein once said, I never try to think of the future. I find that it comes by its own soon enough. So if we look at it this way, we live the visible spectrum, or the visible world we live in, the wavelengths of light, we exist in the narrowest bandwidth and the field, which is visible light. The world of visible light is the smallest, as you can see on this particular chart. The visible spectrum is what you can see, and that's only here, the smallest. You have radio waves, UV, X-rays, you've got microwaves and all the others which are unseen. You can't really see them, but you know they are there. With a bit of training, some can train themselves to go beyond this narrow visible spectrum and see the other rays, the other spectrum, the unseen. Just because you can't see them, it doesn't mean they're not there. We know they are there because we've got radio, we use all of these. So the short waves, they say, gamma rays, have the greatest power. The long waves have less power. And this is what led various militaries of the world to look into the more short waves like X-ray and gamma rays. Because apparently light coming from stars have a range of these, and we're being hit, bombarded by radiation from deep space that we cannot see. So when I was a student in my astronomy, studying astrophysics, one thing that my lecturer once said was, the light coming from objects in space, from galaxies and stars, are far more powerful than the sum total of what's in our solar system. But we don't experience them because we have a sun that provides us with a shielding. So our sun protects us from very harmful rays from out there in space. But there are objects in space far more powerful. We can't see them, but we know we can measure them. And scientists always love measuring things, and it's measurable, the power that they give out. So if we look at the light that we don't see, but we experience, so visible light is here, but all the other wavelengths of light we cannot see, but they also have an influence in our life. Because I tell you, I put to all of you here, even the ones that, may be very skeptical, the thing that you can't see but affects you every day are all those radio waves that are out there. You've got mobile phones that everybody uses these days, smartphones, tablets, and people who are watching, the news. All of these are broadcast frequencies. You can't see them, but they affect your life in a very heavy, because something you see on the news that can change other people's perception and influence your reality indirectly. But essentially, that is from an unseen standpoint. You can't see the radio waves themselves, but you can experience the outcome of it, which is your BBC and all the very honest information that they provide you. Of course, that was meant as a joke. But anyway, let's look at dimensionality, the realms we cannot perceive. So let me see if I can make this. Well, I think you can all see. Now, this is something which somebody who had an experience into the other world shared in at some points. One of the, I can't remember which text I got this from, but this realm where, spirits exist, et cetera, the fiction. You've got people who are maybe kind of hard sort of stuff. So life, the sixth dimension is realm specialists or divine spirits, and the seventh dimension is where the bodhisattva realm, or those who are a focus of helping others. The eighth dimension is the realm of masters and elders and the ascended. Then you've got the ninth dimension, the cosmic realm, years, and then beyond, all the way to, no one really knows how many there are, but this is a simplified understanding, knowledge that's been passed down and has been shared. So it gives you a little bit of an understanding of the layers dimensionality that exists that affects us. So there's one idea that the unseen realm, probably from these other worlds, the unseen dimensions, so forces, energies, entities in these realms do have a great power, and they can influence the human world and the human being in multiple ways. For example, some say in some of these other dimensions, what we used to call the muses or the inspirational, guiding forces, spirit, whatever. They're simply an intelligence and a consciousness that exists in these beyond visual realms, and they can push a thought into your mind through the power of suggestion because of your wavelength of your mind, that where your mind is at a given point in time can be influenced the same way as a radio can tune into the frequency that it's tuned into at a given point in time. So that's one way of how thought forces, consciousness, and feelings in these other realms can trickle down, cascade, and affect you. So some people walk through their day-to-day life not knowing why they feel so drained of energy, depleted, or they feel so inspired. It depends on what energy they are tuned into and what's around them. So beyond that, if we move to the most prevalent forecasts and predictions that people currently are concerned with, everybody is thinking currently about, things like peak oil, we're heading into an energy crisis or food shortage, or what about the possibility of war or the collapse of society, the fall of order or the rise of the potential new world order. So things like these occupy people's minds, especially people that, are wise, awake, and a bit more aware. You know, um, these are the sort of thoughts. So I always say to people, be mindful of where your mind is at any given point in time. Be aware of what you focus your energy and your thoughts on. Because if you dwell on more of a negative, you know, um, anticipation, you will create and find a way of attracting towards you more of that negative reality that you focus on or pay more attention to. If you focus on the good, what's going well for you, what you're looking forward to, you might multiply that and that can become your reality. Because currently, we're heading towards an age where people's perception and the power of their minds have a greater influence on their reality than ever before. You could essentially change your own reality or affect the reality of others by your state of being, by your mind and your energy and your consciousness. But I'm sure you already knew that. Anyway, other realities which people have thought about, the Book of Revelations, RFID chip, things that you can, inject into people through an injection or a vaccine. And yes, there is this reality which people have been aware of, and something that myself and others have spoken about in the past. So these are things that we have to keep in our peripheral view, but we should not allow ourselves to get too drawn into this. And what about the cashless society? Currently, everybody, especially where I live in London, they use their Oyster cards, and they have a policy in many places where they're not accepting cash. And this can only lead us to a digital currency where they already have the laws in place. And so, how are they going to try and control us using money? If you, in the future, people have said that if, in a society that's dystopian, they could easily cut off your money supply or access your bank accounts if you say something they don't like. This is what happened to Nigel Farage recently, and it's happened to a number of people. It's already been happening. So, what should we do about it? What can we do about it? Well, the first thing we cannot do or should not really do is to be afraid of that. Because, like I said before, we know it's happening, but we shouldn't put our energy into what we fear. Instead, we should ponder more on what can we do to avoid this. Well, one way is very simple: use more cash. That's a very direct step that people have been taking. So every problem has a solution. That's one of the things that you learn as a mathematician. There is no problem that exists in this world that does not have a solution. And the nature of a problem itself, the purpose of a problem exists so that it can be solved. Simple. It's what we call an inevitability. What did Rudolf Steiner think about this? Rudolf Steiner was one of the great minds who predicted this. He predicted that in future there will come a time where man's materialistic, tendencies will lead him to develop poisons of the soul that pretend to heal the human body, and they will find a way to eliminate spirituality or God through more and more scientifically determined materialism. That was his exact words. Now, Blavatsky has also had similar ideas about this. Rudolf Steiner was pointing to the possibility of what they're now doing, which is to do with social engineering. What is social engineering? It's the clever manipulation of people in order to gain their trust and gain privileged information from them in order to engineer their behavior into what you prefer their behavior should be, using deception. Now, another aspect of Steiner's, writings also talk about the suppression and the utmost reduction of the soul or spirit's involvement in man to make everything all about materialism and science. So this is the basis of the most determined emphasis, what I call scientifically determined materialism. If you don't believe that there is a spirit world all around you, that there is no magic in life, that there is no soul or an afterlife, then obviously it's all about living here and now and living in a way that's, irresponsible to an extent. Because if there are no rewards or consequences, what they've done is seek to reverse the damage done by unevolved religion and dogma. Well, let's face it, religion has had a negative influence on this world. The whole Dark Ages and the Crusades were all about religion being its most destructive manifestation. So we've gone to an extent far too much the other way by saying, well, the religion's all about trying to impose a reward and punishment, reward for good behavior, punishment for bad behavior. And now the opposite of that, which is there is no good or evil, blah, blah, blah. There is here and now. And you have to do the best you can in this materialistic world. You might as well. So that's the whole problem. And the truth lies somewhere in between both extremes, in the middle path. And the age we're living in is the age of the airwaves or the media. Now, the media is essentially about 4 decades of manipulative programming using communication. Media was perfected, essentially, they used techniques that were perfected in the Second World War, where they used the airwaves, radio and broadcast, in order to control people. And essentially, they thought using what they had, if they developed that further, they could influence the minds of people. So the Third World War is not going to be physical, but it's a war of the mind, essentially, which is what we're living in right now. We're living in an age where it's all about fighting for your mind, your mental space and time. So if you look at this image and keep staring at it long, soon, if you just keep staring, do this exercise, look at this image in front of you. Stare at it at the center. You will probably notice that it looks like the wheels are moving, that it's an image that's in motion, that's dynamic and moving. When in fact, this is just a static image. But that's what happens when you keep staring. If you look at something, it'll start to move. And that's the whole idea of manipulation. It's very simple, but it's about directing focus and the attention. Now, the secret doctrine, this was the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy that Helena Blavatsky published as 2 volumes in 1988. The first volume was about cosmogenesis, and the second was about anthropogenesis. And she talked about the end of the 5th root race. Now, if you look at all of us, the Western society, the 5th root race is the European Aryan society, and the 6th root race is the emergence of a more enhanced being. And some have said this is about the consciousness of the children that are being born on the planet. It started 40 years ago with indigos, then crystals, rainbow children, diamond children, and star children, and this sort of stuff. But it's about the change in consciousness. Now, I see everything is going on in a very positive sense. I see it as people becoming more responsible, because through all of the chaos that we see around us, order always emerges. In the middle of all of this, there is definitely hope. So right now, we're actually seeing the beginning of a more enlightened human being, a more enhanced human being. And the secret doctrine talks about the destruction of the racial genetic failures of nature. So Blavatsky in one point in her book mentions that the higher races. So what does she mean by the higher race? She means those that have the people in this world right now who have somehow found a way to connect to their higher selves, to a higher consciousness. It's all of us essentially, and those like us who come to meetings such as this looking for truth. We are the seekers. And thus will mankind, race after race, perform its appointed cycle pilgrimage. So she could have been referring to the deliberate DNA programming of the present race, which we can see happening, and also what we see with the current mRNA vaccines. They create a new race of techno-sapien, which is failing. and it's predicted to fail. And this is what gives me a great deal of joy when I wake up, because I'm aware that everything negative that we see happening is bound to fail, and it's falling apart, failing on its own. Without us having to do much, we can see it failing preposterously all over. Now, when you see something like that, you know straight away, no matter how brilliant they think they are, and no matter how convoluted or ingenious and technically advanced their plan, it just won't work. It's going to fail, which means those who have stayed true to their, inner calling will essentially be the ones that pass on the torch to a more evolved human being. So if you look at Blavatsky and what she talked about, the ancient Indian idea of the seven yugas. There's supposed to be four yugas in the Vedic teachings, but if you look at it, the four are actually seven. It starts with the golden age on this earth, which is the Krita Yuga, the Satya Yuga, the age of truth. Secondly, it degenerates to what we call the Silver Age, where things are still not too bad. There's still a very evolved civilization, and that was in ancient times. Then you've got the Dwapara Yuga, which is the Bronze Age, and that ended about 4,500, 5,000 years ago, and the beginning of Kali Yuga, which is the age of darkness. Now we're right in that age of darkness, and the turning point where from here on we go back to the Dwapara Yuga, and then it goes onward. So there is an ascension. So these are the two repulsion, counter propulsion, the two forces that are always balancing each other. So we started with the golden age, and now we're in the dark age, and we're on our way back into the age of light. And that's where we are right now. And these are not my words. It's just pretty much what's been handed, in the prophecies, in the teachings. So let's examine this. So there is a common belief in the apocalyptic idea of dire and dystopian manifestations of reality, yes? But what if that may be far from the truth? And what if we're actually going into a better age, into an age of light? What if that's where we're heading? We've already seen things happening. We're in the age of many natural and unnatural disasters. And the biggest fear of Kali Yuga is to end up like the Atlanteans, sunk in the middle of the ocean. Because don't forget, Lemuria and Atlantis were the greatest, most advanced civilizations, the Golden and the Silver Age. They collapsed, and the modern age of the Middle Eastern society, which brought out all of the current, manifestations of our modern world. And the end of this, the Iron Age. But what if the end of this age actually is something far better? We're going to something much brighter. So this is the idea that I'm going to put forward today. Now, the cycle of the yugas, it goes back from 12,500 years, so 11,000 BC to where we are now. If we go forwards 12,000 years, we will end up back in a far better age. So we're currently in the crux from 1700 AD to where we are now. I can almost look at this and share with you that we're going from the dark age into an age of light, which is exactly why the world is in such a chaotic mess right now, because the truth that has been suppressed on this earth is coming up and coming out into the open to be seen and dealt with. So let's look at this long wave forecast. Nikolai Kondratiev, who was a Russian economist and a thinker and a great mind, he was put in one of these gulags, and when he was being interned in Siberia, in prison, he put together this idea of a Kondratiev wave, where he predicted exactly from 1789 all the way to October 2003, he predicted the waves of collapse and growth. And most of his long wave counts have been proven to be correct. We also have somebody else in our history, a great mind who came up with the idea of the four Zoas, called William Blake. So he believed that every age is governed by either one of these four forces: mind, thoughts, or feelings, the heart, or sense of discovery or the sense of pleasure seeking. And so William Blake once said that eventually, in his view, he believed that there are these four zoases in the earlier thing, Vala, which is essentially the culmination of all four aspects. Luva symbolizes the feeling of love or the heart. Urizen is pure reason, the mind, logic, science, dogma. Then you've got Tharmas, which is all about experience. And then you've got the one on top, which is all about feeling. It's all about sensation. It's all about seeking pleasure, pain and pleasure. So you've got these four. And he believed that the power of love will eventually triumph over the power of pure reason. So spirit eventually triumphs over reason, but it must go through its cycle. Now, if we look currently at behavioral futurism and how events work, the best, most accurate I can talk about are something called Alta Webbot. So there was this guy I know is an American guy called Cliff High. He came up with this idea of the Webbot. He put together this thing called asymmetric linguistic trend analysis, which he put all of these algorithms out into the World Wide Web, the internet, a decade and a half, 20 years ago, just to monitor the conversation. So he would put out these bots to monitor the discussions in all these discussion forums. And eventually he got a lot of data. And what he would do is by examining the data, he was looking for the emotionality in the language because he believes that all human beings are psychic and they're all connected and emotional. And because of something he calls release language, depending on the conversations that they're having, if somebody has a feeling at any given point in time, if the emotions are more negative, it means something terrible is about to happen. This is how he was able to predict the tsunami, the collapse of the financial market, so all of these things. And he believes that we're in an age of spectacular chaos where he believes you can't predict what's coming because something far beyond anyone's mindset. Everybody always looks at, oh, things are going wrong, but nobody actually anticipates what if something amazing happens in the future? And that's the power of the cycle. So he believes that the asymmetric language has changed. And right now, there is a whole new magic that's about to happen. And so he says, I care not for the state of the past as long as I can look into the future. So the future, ladies and gentlemen, just to cut a long story short, is looking very positive. And the basic assumptions that we have is the future is uncertain and unknown. Time is relative. It changes based on your perception, but history always repeats itself. And events, the pattern of events, keep reoccurring. And that forms a predictable trend. But reality is a moving target, and to know one single possible variable will be to change the whole outcome. So, which means to know the past, you've got to know what happened in the past properly in order to recreate the future. And that's what we're doing, learning. As humanity, we've gone through thousands of years of evolution to learn from the past. So we won't make the same mistakes twice. Civilizations rise and fall, but they are governed and driven by the need for evolution. When a society stops evolving, it dies. The purpose of human life is constant evolution, transformation, and change. Although we've never formed any law that governs historical facts or the sequence of facts, but by following the pattern of cycles in their development, you can look at the predictable traits. So this is what I'm interested in, the evolution of civilizations as a single rational system, which follows a clear path. Every society grows, it becomes more complex internally, and it grows in diversity in all its attributes. And then you've got self-organizational process. And when that happens, every society, when it becomes bigger in population, there is an increased level of control and order, because the bigger a population grows, the more you need to control it. And then the growth in the influence of human civilizations, it starts to affect natural process. So at any point in time, it's only inevitable that somebody is going to come along and say, we've reached the stage where we are so clever, we know everything, we can now control human beings and create our own ideal human. And then it collapses. What if we're heading to a civilization which is built on cooperation? You know, it could be intelligent and self-organizing, but what if everybody can be involved? What we need is to have a society that has more accountability, symmetry, and lives in harmony with itself. So if you imagine what a world like that will be like in the future. So I think we're heading towards increased accountability where truth will come to light a lot more than it did in previous ages. We're going to see the collapse and end of all tyrannies where humanity will begin to advance. And there will be lots of truth and disclosures of truth that people have been waiting for centuries. I also believe there will be a shift in productive capacity and sovereign communities will rise. We will essentially go back, which is why I think going forwards is not the most important thing, but learning from the past, because there were some civilizations in the past, like, in this country, the greatest time I believe we had was the time of Camelot, when King Arthur was alive, where you had Merlin, you had a community, a society which was morally upright, just, more enlightened. Now, that's what it should look like. But in the mid to longer term, we will see a change in Western politics and the collapse, or either you have a collapse of certain societies or the transformation of that society. But also the way money in this world operates will collapse completely because the whole financial, behavior, the whole model is wrong. It's all about exploitation. So it needs to collapse. And you will also see the end of all the current types of leadership, which is going to be interesting when you look at the US elections this year. It'll be interesting to see what happens. You will also see China, the current form of China, collapse and be replaced with a very different looking society. You'll also see Africa rise in a way you've never seen before. And we'll also see the end of human trafficking and slavery, because human trafficking is something which I don't even want to talk about it in this lecture, but it runs very deep to the leadership of current society, and that will end. So, which brings me to the much needed science. I've shared a few links which are very inspiring to see where, we will head to. If you get a chance, you can share this, have a look at these in your own time. But I'll finish by asking these key questions. What does the future hold for humanity, and where is our world headed? In what direction do we as a civilization or a single collective intelligence head to? Where are we going? So what will be the paradigm, ideology, or social structure to shape the near future? Will we replace post-industrial consumerist society? I don't know. But what will society look like in 10, 30, 50, 100, or even 200 years, given the speed at which our technologies evolve? What is clear is we will need a vastly different approach. Human beings will have to evolve internally as individuals before you see the evolvement of society. Confucius once said, a city or a nation is only as good as one man who lives inside it. The individual and the collective are inextricably linked. So I'll talk about the harmonic principle. This is a human-centered idea based on the good and welfare of every single individual. So a society that understands the welfare of each one is the welfare of the whole nation. That will be a decent civilization to be part of. And we will get there. And if you understand the nature of cause and event, you come to a point where certain parts of civilization, of a society, can be self-organizing. You can use technology in a positive way to self-organize some things, but not from a point of control engineering. We need to, as a humanity, get away from this desire to want to control everything. The control freak nature of technology needs to either die or it needs to change. And we will at some point demonetize. So right now, our society is so driven by corporatism that needs to end, and it will end. There is abundance in terms of surplus. We have the ability to produce enough for everybody. And that's what we have to focus on. Make sure everybody has enough. And we will also, in the next 10 to 20 years, see the reintegration of disciplines where we will no longer be defining ourselves as I am architect, I'm an engineer. No, you are something else. You're a human being that does a job. Don't get, confused. Once there's more information symmetry and everybody has the same knowledge, it'll be very difficult to control anyone. So something to look forward to. Now, I don't normally do this, but I thought, let me just put this out there. Just look out for these. Biotech and the biomedical sector will rise until it collapses, but in the next year, 2025 to 2030, the depression in the economic system, that's where the major upheaval, economic transformation or depression will happen. But you will see the beginning of a new form of a growth, of a market growth in 2030, because we are in an age of a mini ice age, and people talk about the potentials of a pole shift. Some say it's already started to happen, but it's happening more gradually. But there's also been a change in the Earth's orbital tilt, its axis, and by 2028, we would have successfully 3D printed the first human clone. That's what they're suggesting. And of course, Elon Musk is talking about 2035, the colonization of Mars. So these are things that can happen, but we should keep an eye on them. Anyway, what I found in my research was counter-propulsion is a new form of science that can lead to a new industry for the future. It'll help us lift off from the surface and maybe someday build a galactic civilization. But we as a human being need to find a way to master the four forces before we can learn to build cities on other worlds. And they're talking about artificial environments, to create artificial environments in order to improve life. I don't know to what extent that's possible, because in my younger student days, I did work on ideas of that nature and I abandoned it because I thought humanity is currently not capable of doing that because we don't have the level of consciousness needed to survive anywhere else. And if we were to go to any other planet with this behavior, believe me, all it takes is a more advanced race to wipe us out, step on us like a bug. We are not the most intelligent or the most advanced. What we need to do instead is to find a way to feed people in the near future, to focus more on crop production in a more harmonious way, in harmony with nature. And then you will see geographic boundaries start to disappear when human beings wake up to the fact that they are just human beings on one earth. And then we can build a super economy for the welfare of all. What will the people of the future look like? I leave you with this thought. He who would create the new must endure the passing of the old with ease and tranquility. You've been a very patient audience. I pause and I shall thank you and stop there. It's been a pleasure. Take your questions now.
Thank you very much indeed, Chad, for a fantastically interesting and diverse, and I have to say, optimistic and upbeat view of the world, because we're so used, aren't we, to having all these grim, Armageddon-laden scenarios of dystopian, destroyed worlds that lie ahead of us. And it's almost like that is part of this fear and conditioning mechanism which we've all come to encounter. I just have a question myself for Chad before we proceed with that. And I think what underpins everything that he said today is this fundamental realization that human beings have to understand who they are. And I think this is happening, but human beings have to understand that they're much more than flesh and bone, and that they do have subtle principles, some of which continue from life to life. So what I'm asking, Chad, in one sense, is this is all underpinned, isn't it, by a consciousness revolution of some kind?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We are seeing a consciousness revolution, consciousness shift. It actually began in the 80s, or it started off with the 60s, but since the 80s to now, we've gone through so many stages where right now, so many people are just getting it, are finally becoming aware of a lot more than any other age. And this is a brilliant thing. And even people that you would not even, imagine, they're starting to, ask questions that you wouldn't expect of them. So it's starting slower than we may have thought, but it is definitely happening. So I feel very optimistic about the whole thing.
Thank you very much indeed, Chad, and to everyone else. It's been one of the most fascinating sessions I can recall, and it's covered so much ground. And I think it has given most of us, even though many of us perhaps are a little jaded, a feeling of optimism that we might be heading for something other than a Hollywood version of dystopia. May I thank Chad again for his brilliant lecture and your company, and we'll see you hopefully in a fortnight. So from Leeds TS, bye for now.